Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a spicy kung pao chicken that I like to do with a little bit of black bean sauce, which comes from Chinese cuisine. We're going to take a look at a couple of the ways that I have altered this recipe. It originally stems from a Panda Express stir fry that I have done a whole bunch of crazy shit that now is just the thing that I make all the time now. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about kung pao chicken, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining. As always, pretty much everything that we cook on stream, there is a recipe video that goes along with the thing that I'm cooking today. That video for this kung pao chicken came out a while ago, I think sometime last year. So if you're looking for that, head over to the YouTube channel. That's over at youtube.com/woocancook. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. Yay. We have new recipes coming out every Friday, so many Fridays ago was the recipe for this kung pao chicken. Last Friday was a recipe for something. What did we do last Friday? I forget. Hot and spicy chow mein, which is actually what we cooked on Tuesday. And this Friday coming, we're going to be doing a tomato egg stir fry, which is kind of like a Chinese breakfast classic. So lots of fun stuff coming out Friday, so if you haven't yet, definitely check out the YouTube channel, check out what's going on over there. We got new stuff coming out every Friday. So as with pretty much every stir fry that we do, I'm crushing and mincing. This is right now 4 cloves of garlic. You'll find that I start a lot of recipes, especially these stir fry recipes, with garlic, because they tend to work as really good fundamentals for umami. So as we start like stacking on layers of umami with all of the other things that we're going to add to our stir fry, we oftentimes will start off with aromatic elements. That's usually the garlic, and then followed by ginger, which is going to come up next. So that's our garlic. I'm giving it a good crush with the flat side of my knife. Then we're going to set it aside and dive into ginger next. Lots of people ask me about pre-cut or pre-minced garlic and ginger, which I have used quite a bit. Actually, I've used it a little bit because early on in the pandemic, it was really hard to find garlic for some reason. So I was using pre-minced garlic because it was the only stuff that I could find. And what happens when they pre-mince garlic is they're essentially like passing it through a food processor, and then they preserve it, and I think they're preserving it in olive oil, maybe some kind of oil. And what happens when you preserve it in olive oil or oil is it eventually just kind of like sheds out all of its allicin into that oil. So what I was finding when I was using that pre-minced stuff is that it just doesn't taste like anything. And I was using like huge quantities of garlic. Like I was literally using like 4 or 5 tablespoons of garlic, and I could just genuinely not even taste that there was garlic in the dish. So that's been my experience. I don't know if other people have different experiences with the pre-minced stuff, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't taste like anything. There's no point in even using it. So it might save you quite a bit of time, but not super useful. Next up though, this is my ginger, which I just finished peeling with the back of a spoon. And then I'm taking my knife and we're running through it for our fine mince. It helps very much if you have a sharp knife at this point. If you're trying to do a fine mince with a dull knife, it can take quite a while, because what will happen is your knife, if it's not sharp enough, it's eventually just going to start smashing ginger into the cutting board. And it basically just starts smashing stuff instead of cutting stuff. So it will take a really long time because you're basically just smashing ginger. So, moral of the story is when you start mincing, or generally anytime before you start cooking, you want to make sure that that knife is very sharp, otherwise you're going to have a hell of a time chopping stuff. So that's my garlic and ginger. Next up, we're going to dive into some veggies next. So if you're keeping track, a kung pao chicken, you could use really whatever you want in a kung pao chicken. The real moral of the story is that a kung pao chicken is some kind of stir fry that involves chicken. Usually there's typically a couple mandatory things that go into a kung pao chicken. Obviously the first one is chicken, but then the second and maybe second most important thing that goes into a kung pao chicken is peanuts. Sometimes it's cashews, some kind of nut. And then very often you'll come across things like onion, bell pepper, carrots, broccoli, any kind of veggie really. So what we're going to be using today is some bell pepper, and then we're going to be using a little bit of, well, we're using some sweet white onion and Ooh, some bean sprouts. We're using some leftover bean sprouts. So that's what we're using today. I believe in the original recipe, we used onion, bell pepper, and I think there was some celery involved. That's what we used for that particular version, mainly because it's just what I had on hand. I don't have those exact ingredients today. What we are going to be using instead are basically just the things that looked fresh when I went to the grocery store. So here we are. So again, whoops. I'll mention this again. Very, very important anytime that you're doing a Kung Pao chicken is that it's basically just a big old stir fry. So be flexible, adapt, and use what you have. Also, don't drop the base. Here's the bowl. Cool. So here's my bell pepper up next. What I'm doing is I'm slicing it, or I'm dicing this into pretty large dices here. So we're going for about 1 inch long or so. The goal here is that we're trying to keep these fairly large, mainly trying to make general shape and size of our pieces of chicken so that we have really, really nice even bites to our veggies. So what we don't want to do is start slicing these really, really thin because they're going to cook unevenly, so very important. We want to keep these relatively close in shape and size as the other things in our stir fry so that we have a nice even cook. So also, very important, there's always a white membrane that's inside of your bell pepper. That's the thing that I just pulled out. That stuff, it can get pretty bitter, so try and pick that out unless you forget like I did, and then you have to go back. So that's our bell pepper. Next up, this is going to be half of a sweet white onion. Some folks asked me what is the difference between a sweet white onion and a regular onion. Sweet white onion is just the full name for what the onion is called. You don't necessarily need to have a sweet white onion. You can use yellow onion. You could use any kind of onion you have. I would probably recommend avoiding things like a purple onion because it's going to be quite different in taste, but use what you got. So I'm picking off, this is the first layer of my onion here. Then we're going for slices down the center. I left that root end on very intentionally. That's this bit right here. And then we're going to go downward and chop around this root. And here's our root. And what happens is when you chop around that root, the root is basically holding the onion together as you chop. So if you've ever run into the problem while you're dicing an onion, where the onion starts falling apart on you while you're chopping, and then you get this really uneven chop, that's why we do that. Gotta leave that root on. Let's see. Okay, next up is our bean sprouts. So we're running through some old bean sprouts that I had on hand from something. I think we were doing like a chow fun a while ago. Yeah, these look good. These are about to go bad, so we're going to be using them up. In a Kung Pao chicken, I'm not sure that they're necessarily the most appropriate thing, but honestly, use a bean sprout anywhere I can find it. Oh, what cuisines would I recommend for a red or purple onion? Yeah, not great in a lot of Asian dishes. Where I oftentimes will use a red or purple onion is anywhere that you use a shallot. I've sometimes even substituted it for a shallot, which is not something that I highly recommend. I think they're pretty close, but not exactly the same thing as a shallot. So I've used red onion in things like pad thai or pad kim mao. A lot of Thai dishes that are using shallots, you could substitute in a red onion. But in that case, though, if you are at the grocery store and you're buying a red onion and you're making those things, you might as well just buy a shallot because it's going to work out better. For the most part, when we're using a red onion, my favorite way of using red onion is just raw. Don't try and cook it because you're cooking off the best part of the onion, which is the fact that it's like a really like punchy and like aggressive onion. So I like them like anytime they're raw. I used one pretty recently in a recipe that we did for a larb, which is like a Thai lettuce wrap. And we again used that in substitution of, I think it was supposed to be a shallot, and then I ended up using a red onion. But again, raw, which I thought was real nice. Also, I think the big advantage of using a red onion is that they're really pretty. So they like pop out really nicely. So when we used it in that larb, it looked really, really pretty. What else did I use? Oh, I did another Thai dish called a pad gao prao, which is basically like a Thai stir fry. A lot of Thai food uses red onion, mostly because I think a lot of Thai food is actually involving a lot of shallot. So anywhere that you see a shallot come up, you can use a red onion instead. It's going to be okay. Good question. Yeah. All right, next up we're diving into our chicken here. Today we're using some chicken thigh. I think in the original recipe I might have used chicken breast. And really any kind of chicken that you have is going to work fine. Or you technically don't have to use chicken. If you want it to be a kung pao chicken, it obviously has to involve some kind of chicken. But you could also use things like, you could use some pork, you could use beef, really any kind. You could probably do this with tofu, that would work out really great too. Any of those things are going to work out okay. What we do want to do, again, just like we did with our bell peppers, I'm paying attention to the general shape and size of my chicken here. So I'm going to go for a pretty similar sized dice here. So we're going for pieces about this big or so. And that, again, just like with the bell pepper, is going to help us keep a relatively even bite to the stir fry here. So this is generally going to be a thing that we pay attention to when we're doing stir fries that involve a lot of chopped things, so like chicken and bell peppers, onions, all of those things. We want to pay attention to how we're chopping it, because if you chop it too large or too small, or if it's not relative to the other things that are in our stir fry, if they're not the right size, what we're going to end up with is a really, really uneven bite, which nobody likes. Then you're going to have a bad time. So what we're doing is I'm paying attention to that shape and size and making sure that my dice on my chicken is the same size as the dice on my onions and the dice on my bell pepper. So, all right, that's it for dicing. Let's clean this off. So that's my chicken. We're going to do a real quick marinade here. I'm not going to get super fancy with our chicken marinade. I believe in the original recipe we did quite a number of things, but I'm feeling lazy, so I'm going to do the more simple marinade for our chicken today. So what we're going to do is my standby marinade for basically everything that I ever marinate. Pretty much any time that I'm doing a chicken marinade, or really any kind of marinade, and I don't know what else to do, this is probably the marinade that I'm basically going to use. So this is, to kick things off, that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, then a single tablespoon of sesame oil, 1 tablespoon, this is Shaoxing wine. If you've never come across Shaoxing wine, it's a type of Chinese cooking wine, and it is very, very closely related to what dry cooking sherry is. So, if you can't find Shaoxing wine, or if you don't live near a Chinese grocery store, go pick yourself up some dry cooking sherry, which is pretty readily available, and you should be able to maybe come close to or maybe even get the exact same thing. Some people even say that dry cooking sherry is even better than Shaoxing wine, and that's mostly because Shaoxing wine is produced really cheaply now, so it has a lot of additives. So if you can't find it, dry cooking sherry might even be better than Shaoxing wine. And then the last 2 things that I just added, that was half a teaspoon each of white pepper and cornstarch. And then we're going to mix to combine. Oh, could I do a speed recap of what we've done so far? Yeah, no worries, you just came in late. What did we just finish doing? Yeah, speed recap. So here's what we just finished doing. It's totally fine if you come in late. So we first chopped up our garlic and ginger. That's this. You'll generally see me referring to this as our aromatics in a lot of recipes, for the specific reason that we're looking for their aromatic qualities. And then we chopped up our veggies, which is our bell pepper, our onions, and then this is some bean sprouts that were just gave a quick wash to. So the most important thing to remember about a kung pao chicken is that the veggies that you can use really any kind of veggies. So today we're using a bell pepper, onions, and a little bit of leftover bean sprouts that I had on hand, mostly because that's what I have. So, but you can really use any kind of veggie that you want. You could use broccoli, you could use carrots, you could use celery. Celery is a really great filler ingredient for veggies. Any of those things that you want will work out great. What's probably the most important 2 ingredients to a kung pao chicken, number 1 is the chicken, obviously, because it's in the name. And the second, and maybe just as important ingredient that we're going to use is a little bit of peanuts, or a lot of times I see cashews. The element is really iconic in a kung pao chicken, and it's sort of like the stir-fry quality that identifies a kung pao chicken is chicken with some kind of peanut, or sometimes cashew. So we're going to use some of those today. All right. And generally, I think pretty close recap. I think that's everything that we've done. I might have forgot something. Sorry if you, no, totally fine. I don't really have a flow, so it's totally fine. I don't know if anyone has noticed, but I get sidetracked quite a bit. That's totally fine. Ooh, how do I feel about pistachios? Really expensive. I love pistachios. I never buy them because they're really expensive. At least here in California, I think it's like $12 for a bag of pistachios. I also never tried to cook with it either. Alright, so next up I'm assembling my sauce element here. So this is going to be the thing that we put on top of our final stir fry. It's going to be the last thing that goes into our stir fry. So lots of times if you're watching people cook this dish in a kitchen or in some kind of restaurant, you'll see them spooning this on with like a sometimes like a soup ladle or something. They'll just like straight up just have a bowl of it sitting already. What I like to do is assemble it off heat so we don't just dump sauce into our wok. Mainly because it kind of gives us an opportunity to stop and taste what's going on. So anytime that I can, you will notice that I'm trying to insert as much opportunity as possible to stop and taste. Who's this guy? Yeah, that's me. Cool. So that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of fish sauce for a little bit of fishy umami, as the name implies. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start working on like creating that really dark and caramel color to our wok fry. So that comes from a couple of different places. I'm starting off with some black vinegar. 2 tablespoons, sorry. If you can't find black vinegar, you could use plain old rice vinegar and it's going to work out okay too. I like to use black vinegar in this case because it kind of drives that color, caramel color of our wok fry a little bit more. Mr. Sauce doesn't belong in here. Am I missing something? It is, yes. So, and then, so the very last thing that goes into our wok, our sauce element today, this is really hard to open, is a bit of black bean sauce. So what we're using today is some Lao Gan Ma black bean sauce. So if you're familiar with the term Lao Gan Ma, you'll see it comes up in a lot of my recipes. When we refer to Lao Gan Ma, we're usually referring to the chili crisp, which is this spicy chili crisp. It's just like a chili, like red chili flake that has been cooked, like long cooked over a low heat for a super long time, usually like an hour or so. And it's what it does is it yields this like really hot, like really interesting, but like heat that comes out of the oil. So lots of times we'll repurpose that oil. What the brand is called Lao Gan Ma, which is referring to this old Chinese woman on the bottle. They also make a black bean sauce or black bean paste, which I love if you can find it. It's a little bit hard to find because you kind of have to. I had to go to like 2 or 3 different Chinese stores to find it, which is why I never actually like call for this particular black bean sauce in any recipe, because I know that it's really hard to find. But what it essentially is a black bean paste that has been combined with that hot chili oil. So what we're going to do is we're using 2 tablespoons? Yeah, 2 tablespoons of this. In the original recipe, I did not specify to use this particular black bean paste. So if you can't find it, you could also just use a regular black bean paste and then combine it with a little bit of chili crisp oil, which that first jar that I pulled out. All right, last up, I'm going to add to our original recipe calls for chicken stock. I forgot to defrost chicken stock today, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. And that's just going to loosen things up a little bit. Most of that water is probably just going to cook off in the wok fry, but it just sort of slows that cook time down a little bit so we don't end up with like a really, really reduced and concentrated sauce element too early. Okay, last up. All right, so last up is maybe the most important ingredient in literally any Chinese stir fry. What we're going to do is create some cornstarch slurry. So this is our cornstarch, and this is the element that you will see come up in pretty much all Chinese stir fries because it is how you create thick and like thick and saucy elements to our stir fries. So without the cornstarch, what you'll end up with is just sort of like a pretty loose and watery stir fry. I like to think of it as sort of like how pasta water is used in Italian cooking. It's how you create thick sauces. Chinese food, we do a very similar thing, but instead of pasta water, it's cornstarch. What I'm doing is I'm basically just dissolving this cornstarch in water here, and that helps us make sure that that cornstarch doesn't clump up, whereas if you were to just drop spoonfuls of cornstarch into your wok fry, it's probably going to clump up with something. Cornstarch clumps up with everything. It's super frustrating. So what we want to do before it gets into our stir fry is make sure that it's dissolved into a liquid form, and that's just going to make sure things don't turn into a cornstarch clump, which has happened to me more times than I can count. So that's our cornstarch. Real quick before we head over to the stove, we're going to circle back to our chicken. This is our chicken that has been marinating for quite a while. What we're going to do is we're going to do this in two separate stages. So the first thing that I'm going to do is start off by searing my chicken, which I don't think I did in the original recipe. Yeah, I think I just cooked it in the original recipe. So our chicken marinade, it has a couple of things in it, but the most relevant thing that we're about to do is that cornstarch that's in our marinade. So we use half a teaspoon of cornstarch. What that's doing is it's going to coat the exterior of our chicken in this marinade with that cornstarch, and what it's going to do is slow down the cook time of the exterior to our chicken by just a little bit, usually about maybe 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds. And it slows down the cook time just long enough so that we can get a nice crispy exterior and also finish cooking the interior. So without that cornstarch, lots of times what happens with chicken is the interior doesn't finish cooking before the exterior does, or sometimes the exterior will overcook while the interior finishes cooking, which is not ideal in any case. So that cornstarch, it kind of balances out our cook time so that we don't end up with overcooked or undercooked chicken. All right. Okay, so over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up. We're going to let that go for maybe another 30 seconds or so. Once it starts getting real hot, we can start searing our chicken. Yeah, cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came up with a recipe for a hot and spicy chow mein, which is one of my favorite chow meins right now. And it's a part of a series that we've been doing where we've been dedicating recipes that were basically homages to things that you can find in restaurants here in the California Bay Area. So that hot and spicy chow mein comes from a restaurant here in Oakland called Shandong, which is sort of like a legendary noodle house in Oakland. You will oftentimes do anytime somebody asks where to get good Chinese food in Oakland. This Friday coming up, we have a recipe for a tomato egg stir fry, which is sort of like a classic breakfast comfort food for me. That's coming up this Friday, and then Friday after that is going to be, we're kicking off our Chinese fusion series with some lapchang carbonara, which is basically a carbonara, but instead of the guanciale, we've substituted in Chinese lapchang sausage, which is really interesting and really tasty. So all of that stuff coming up every Friday. So if you haven't yet, check out the YouTube channel. Lots of stuff popping up over there. We're working our way up to 5,000 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Cool, so over on the stove, my wok is getting ripping hot. We're gonna add, this is gonna be 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. And then, as always, we're going to do our long yao, which is essentially coating that wok in cold oil while it's ripping hot. That's creating our nice non-stick surface. And then, one piece at a time, I'm going to add my chicken in. And what we're doing right now is we're going to go for nice crispy pieces of chicken. So if you want, if you're feeling lazy especially, you can absolutely just drop the chicken in and start stir frying. That will work okay too. But what I like to do is give it an opportunity to sear, which is very important to do with a piece at a time. So our goal here is to add the chicken in with its largest surface area facing downward, because it gives us the most opportunity to develop crispy qualities in our chicken. If we were to just drop the chicken in and start stir frying, it would still cook fine, but it wouldn't get quite as crispy because the chicken would start stacking on top of itself, and then parts of that chicken would end up steaming, which is not okay, or not as ideal, I should say. So that's our chicken. What we're going to do is we're going to let that go undisturbed for a full 2.5 minutes. So I like to do is set a timer. The most important thing to remember anytime that you're searing literally anything is give it its full duration of time without moving it. So if you move around a sear, so if you start messing around with it, start shaking it, if you start checking under it to see if it's already done cooking or not, then you're going to mess up that sear and things are going to not sear properly, and you're going to have like mediocre seared chicken, which is not great. So the most important thing anytime that you're searing something, stop touching it. Really important. Yeah. So we're going to let that go for another 1.5 minutes. We're at about 45 seconds right now. Yeah. Cool. The second and also maybe really important thing to remember anytime that you're working in a round bottom wok. When we're searing stuff, what I like to do is give that wok a good rotation. And what that's doing is it's just moving that oil around a little bit so that the oil reaches every part of that chicken sear. What happens sometimes, especially if you're searing a lot of stuff, is that chicken that's sitting on the exterior portion of the wok, like right around this side, because it's not making contact with as much oil, it doesn't end up searing, it just ends up burning, which is not ideal either. So what I like to do is give that wok every once in a while, give it a little bit of a rotation to make sure that the oil is touching every part of that chicken, so we don't burn stuff. Yeah, that's looking good. So we're at about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. We're going to let that go for about 20 more seconds. Right now, right about the time where you start wondering if your chicken is burning, which technically it is doing. There's technically a controlled burn. So stop panicking and don't touch it. Yeah. Almost, but not quite. So I'm giving that chicken a toss. You'll notice that we've developed this nice crispy qualities right around those edges of that chicken where it was searing. That's what we're going for there, is all of those crispy qualities on those edges. I'm giving this a toss. We're going to let it go for another minute, and that's just to make sure that the chicken cooks all the way through, and we can move on to our stir fry. Yeah. All right. Let's pull that chicken out. So I'm pulling my chicken out, and then I'm going to go a little bit off book here, so we're not quite following the recipe anymore. And what I'm going to do is deglaze with our sauce elements. So we have all of this nice fond sitting here at the bottom of our wok. That's coming from basically all of that stuff that we just stir-fried. And then what I'm doing here is I'm adding my sauce elements so that we can make use of all of that fond. This is a technique that you come across in a lot of European cooking. You generally don't see deglazing happening in a lot of Chinese cuisine. I'm not really sure why though. I know that it works really well. So what I've done is I start making a habit of deglazing with our sauce element just long enough to kind of get all of that good stuff off the bottom of our wok. Try not to spill it. And then we can rinse out our wok. So basically what we just did is we just deglazed all of that chicken fat that was stuck to the bottom of our wok, and we introduced it to our sauce element, which is over here. There it is. So in our sauce element now, which we just finished pulling out of the wok, all of that chicken fat is now in our sauce, so we don't end up letting that go to waste. And then over on our right, in our red bowl, here's our nice crispy seared chicken, which is what we're looking for. All of that crispy edges right here, all of this stuff, that stuff, that stuff. That's what we're looking for there, crispy quality. So what I'm doing next is I'm wiping down my wok. That's just going to get all of this junk out of the wok that didn't come out in that deglaze. There shouldn't be too much. If you did that deglaze properly, most everything should have come out, unless you didn't do it right. And then we're going to let that reheat, and then we're going to get to cooking our stir fry next, so our veggies. Yeah. Cool. All right. So if we're paying attention, we have 3 different vegetables that are going into our kung pao chicken today. That's our bell pepper, our bean sprouts, and our onions. 2 out of those 3 are pretty delicate. So our bell pepper we're going to require a little bit more cook time, usually because it's a little bit more of a durable veggie. So those bean sprouts pretty much can be done raw. We're just going to throw it in like in the last 10 seconds. If they're in there any longer than that, they're basically going to overcook. They can mostly cook in residual heat even. And the onions are also very, very delicate. We are going to let that cook for about a minute just to cook off some of the bite of that onion. But both of those 2 veggies, they're not going to spend very long at all in our wok fry. So mostly what we're doing here is just cooking up those bell peppers. So I'm going to start off again. This is 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to add, this is a handful of Tianjin peppers. These are dry peppers. They add a nice little bit of like fragrant capsaicin heat. Fragrant heat. Woo. Try not to let them blow up on your hand. They add a little bit of fragrant quality to the wok fry, so I like to let them go in that oil because they start blooming out all of that heat. Not too long though, so don't let them burn. Then I'm following up. This is my garlic and my ginger going in. And then we're going to do is make sure that that garlic and ginger is making good solid contact with that wok oil. And that's going to bloom out all of those aromatic qualities. Try not to drop these. Whoops. There we go. All right. Anyway, there's our peppers, followed by our bell pepper going in. And like I mentioned earlier, the bell peppers, they're a little bit more durable than our other veggies, so I like to let them go for a little bit of a head start here. So we're going to hold off on those onions and those bean sprouts for a good solid minute. And that just gives our bell pepper a little bit more time to finish cooking. All right. Then next up, I'm going to add my peanuts here, which I want to, just like our other elements, make sure that it's getting in good solid contact with the wok. So I'm pushing things to one side, then we're dropping in our peanuts. So just like we did with our garlic and ginger, we want those to toast in the wok oil, so I'm making sure that they get good solid contact there. Then following up with our onion. I'm going to give that one more toss. And as I mentioned before, those onions, they're pretty delicate, so what we're really trying to do here is just cook off a little bit of that raw bite that comes with an onion. We're not trying to make them tender or translucent in any way. We want them to be pretty crispy still, so don't get carried away here. And finally, so the last thing that we want to pay attention to, so listen, you'll notice that the wok has stopped sizzling super aggressively. So this is generally a sign, if you do hear that happen when you're wok cooking, that the wok is not hot anymore. So it's like not super hot anymore. This is in our case going to be okay because we're not really cooking much anymore. Really what we're just doing is combining at this point. But if you do notice this happen in your wok cooking and you have a lot of ingredients left to cook, it means that you probably need to start pulling stuff out of the wok and cooking it in more batches. So there's my chicken going back in. I'm going to let things toss to combine one more time. Then finally, here's my bean sprouts and our sauce element. Oh, let's make sure these are tossed. Alright, now is our sauce element. So just like we do anytime that we're working with a very concentrated sauce, I'm being careful. I'm not going to drop all of that sauce in. I'm going to add it a little bit at a time. Then we're going to toss and then add more as needed. So if you find that you don't need all of the sauce, don't panic. You don't have to add all of the sauce. It's not the end of the world if you don't use it all. Don't feel like it's wasteful. Really what we want to make sure that we do is we're not over seasoning our saute here, which you can absolutely do at this stage because depending on how many veggies you use and how much stuff is in your wok fry, you may or may not actually need it. So I think today we're going to use it all. So last thing up that we're going to add before we pull this off of our stove range is going to be our cornstarch slurry. So once again, I'm making sure that that cornstarch is dissolved in that water. We don't have any large clumps hanging around. And then we're just going to start tossing to combine, and that's going to really develop that nice thick sauce there at the bottom. You'll notice that the liquid elements in our sauce are going to start going from kind of loose and liquidy to more solid or like cohesive and thick and luxurious. That's the quality that we're looking for there. And that's going to do it, I think. So, let's pull this off of the stove. And then the last thing that we want to do pretty much anytime that we're wok cooking, especially if you find yourself using a carbon steel wok like this one, what I like to do is give it a good rinse while it's hot. So don't go and sit down and start eating. Very, very useful. because what happens is while that carbon steel is hot, you've got this nice non-stick surface. So if you just give it a rinse with a little bit of water, I'd say like 90% of everything is just going to rinse right off. If you were to try and do that after you finish eating, for example, so like an hour later, all of that stuff that was sitting in the wok, it wouldn't rinse off anymore. It would just sort of like stick. And then you're going to have to start scrubbing that stuff off, which is not super ideal. So do yourself a favor, clean that wok while it's hot, and all of this stuff just comes right off. And that's going to do it. All right. Let's serve this up. So I mentioned this pretty much anytime that we're working with Tianjin peppers, but you also want to remember that a dried Tianjin pepper, it's technically not edible. Really what we're just looking for is the fragrant quality that comes from it. So if you want, you can start picking them out at this point, sort of like a bay leaf, how you would pick a bay leaf out at the end of the cook. They're not really doing much anymore. I like to leave them because I think they're pretty, but you have to leave them in though. Last up, I'm finishing this with, these are the greens of our green onions. I happen to have quite a number of them left over, so we didn't actually chop them today. Looks so good. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Go. Let's give this a taste. Oh yeah. Yeah, I love those bell peppers. They're really, really crispy. And just sort of like the way that we've timed those veggies, they're like timed out so that they stay nice and crispy and relatively fresh with a lot of like brightness because they've been cooked for a really, really brief amount of time on really, really hot heat or high heat. Whereas if you were to long cook any of those veggies, including the bell peppers, they would turn out mushy, which is the opposite of what we're looking for in most wok stir frying. We're trying to keep those veggies nice and crisp. So one of my favorite ways of doing veggies. Yeah. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite stir fries, mostly because I love stir fries that involve a lot of veggies. So cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday or Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So this Friday, as in tomorrow, we have a new recipe coming up for a tomato egg stir fry, which is one of my favorite breakfast dishes that come from Chinese food. I used to eat it when I was a kid a lot. I think it was just because my dad was trying to make use of a lot of leftover tomatoes. So I have a lot of memories of eating this stir fry. Not necessarily even for breakfast. I feel like I used to eat it for dinner a lot. So, but it's definitely a breakfast dish. So that's coming up tomorrow. Friday, that is going to be a lapchang carbonara, which is basically a carbonara that has removed its pancetta or guanciale and replaced it with a Chinese lapchang sausage, which is really interesting and really delicious, and also a dish that I fucked up many times. I messed it up 3 times while I was testing out that recipe because somebody sent it to me and then I messed around with it and I did it all wrong. So all of that coming up very soon. So if you haven't found our YouTube channel yet, definitely hop over to YouTube. check out what's going on over there. That's also where the second live stream lives. So if you want to check out or pay attention or find out what we're going to be cooking next, that's a good place to start, because there's a whole schedule of everything that we're going to be cooking. Most of which I don't even know off the top of my head. So lots of people ask me what we're cooking next week, and I don't really remember. So to that end, I don't remember what we're cooking next week. So we're working our way up to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Have a good weekend too. Cool. All right, so that's it, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here doing dishes, and I'll see you Tuesday. What are we cooking Tuesday? Let's look. Tuesday we're cooking, we're doing string bean chicken. That's another one of my favorite stir fries, which is going to make use of some nice string beans and green beans. We're going to talk about what the hell the difference is between a string bean and a green bean. We can also talk about what the fuck is a long bean, which is a crazy thing that I've seen in Chinatown all the time now. So all that coming up next week. All right, thanks everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to go up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the move. Still, when we fight it, baby. Alright, never mind. Yes, I found it now. Alright, I'm finally in love with love, and it's bringing me down. You want to be, baby, yes. You want to be, baby. Everybody wants to be different. I still got streets, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got streets, but more like a took of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes, sir. as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're real sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your lip all the time. I live alone, all the same old places. Roundabout was always down. But you poured out your heart, and I didn't want to waste it. There's nothing like love to give me you're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. Ooh, yeah. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
ta cũng bình thường.